Thanks.
Peace, y'all. This is Rod Stars.
This is G1. Together we Rebel Diaz.
And when we out here in D.C. in the DMV, we bump WPFW.
Washington.
Every Tuesday, 9 to 10 a.m. Voices with Vision. You heard?
We've been trying to move this struggle from a lower to a higher level.
I have on the line. Very honored to have, well, I don't know if I qualify to the brother as a friend, but Arnold August has a M.A. in political science from McGill University, Montreal, where he resides. His most recent book is Cuba and Its Neighbors, Democracy. Well, it's not his most recent book. We're getting ready to talk about the most recent one, but the one before that was Cuba and Its Neighbors, Democracy in Motion. And as an accomplished journalist, he contributes articles in English and Spanish to websites in the United States, Canada, Cuba, Latin America, and Europe. And since 1997, Arnold has spent extended periods in Cuba pursuing his intensive investigations. And his latest book, Cuba-U.S. Relations, Obama, and Beyond. And I'd be remiss if I didn't add to Arnold's background is that just this past summer, I believe, Arnold, you can correct me if I'm wrong, with July, you were awarded the Friendship Medal of the Council of State of the Republic of Cuba in honor for your work around Cuba and normalizing relations. Arnold, welcome
Correct.
to Voices with Vision.
Thank you very much for having me once again. It's always a pleasure to exchange with you. And just, if I may, I'd like to tie in your initial comments, initial themes, with regards to what I have to say. The importance of Black Agenda Report cannot be underestimated. For example, in the course of my work on Cuba-U.S. relations, Black Agenda Report, Glenn Ford, and other journalists have always been an important guide for me so that people do not carry illusions with regards to the long-term policy of the United States with regards to Cuba, including when it was initiated by Barack Obama. On the second point, the days of action in D.C., I highly recommend people participating fully in one way or another in these actions. I myself participated on at least 2 occasions in which they very professionally organized groups of people to lobby right in the Congress with representatives, members of Congress, to try and convince them to either make the blockade more flexible or to lift the blockade altogether.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, brother. Thank you for that plug, and then and for Orth for that explanation of both things. I wanted to start now. There's so much we could talk about. This is a chocolate. We're not going to have enough time, but I wanted to. I like one of the things I like about this book and all of you. So I've actually have read. I'm not going to lie and say I've read the complete one of your first one, but I've read like at least 1/3. I was going to say half, but then I just should not be telling fibs. But actually it's very instructive in terms of understanding the misnomers about democracy in both countries. And you're one of the few people, like, in fact, I think you might be the only person that has really been giving information that allows people to kind of compare. One of the most propaganda, misinformation about Cuba is that it's not a democracy. It doesn't have democracy. And so you are an expert in both in systems of democracy, of not just in Cuba but here and then other places in Latin America. And so I wanted to, but we're not going to start there. I wanted to start where, well, one, it's really impressive that your book is raised up by Ricardo Alarcón de Quesada. And he has a piece in here. I just want to read really quickly from it, a little part of it that he writes. He says, to put an end to the deception, rehabilitate the truth, and help others understand the issues is a challenge that must be taken up with academic rigor and intellectual integrity. And this book by Arnold August makes a key contribution to the task. It is one of several bold and enlightening works he has written about the Cuban system and how it compares with those of its neighbors, including the United States. August's work sets him apart from a majority of authors who have covered these subjects, primarily because, in contrast with the typical approach of the so-called Cubanologist, he has declined to conform to the certain narrow visions that espouses U.S.-centric falsehoods and half-truths as dogma, and also because he has analyzed the Cuban experience from within, living in Cuba like another Cuban and taking part in the daily life of the country, something that other observers have not even attempted. August comes to the task of the prejudice and braggadocio that encumber the thinking of many who claim to interpret and judge Cuba from afar without delving into its history. And so that's what Ricardo Alarcón says. And if people who really follow Cuba, even just partly, would know Ricardo Alarcón, who among many things was actually the president of the National Assembly of the People's Power of Cuba, and a number of other positions he's holding. He's a very astute person. But that's what he says about your book, and I want to go right into it so you can explain to us. You say, and a lot of us, I kind of start with the Platt Amendment and all that when it comes to imperialism, U.S. imperialism against Cuba wanting to dominate it, but you actually take it even farther back than that, with the 13 colonies and whatnot. Give us that, some context on that.
Yes, I think that it is important for readers in the West, especially United States of America, because this book is basically addressed to Americans as well as Canadians. Now, in order to help people shed what I call U.S.-centric notions with regards to democracy, that is, notions, preconceived views based on the U.S. official definition of what is democracy, multi-party system, etc., etc. So in order to do that, I strive to go to the very beginnings of American history, that is the 13 colonies, with regards to one or two major points. One is that the 13 colonies, from the beginning, from the first president, Washington, and on, they always had in their, as part of their political program, their foreign relations program, to try and get Cuba into the realm of the United States. This was always the basic goal, going from the beginning, and I would argue right to the present time. Now, the other thing is that in the course of the development of the 13 colonies, right from the beginning, we have what everyone knows about, the supposedly United States as a chosen people to lecture people all over the world with regards to themes such as democracy, etc. So that is why it's important, while there's so much views that are hedged and in favor of the U.S. view on democracy and foreign relations, especially in the United States, it's important for people to get a hang on that and to see the very origins of this outlook that continue until today.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And then, and so you also, I think this is the first chapter, describe, and I guess this is relevant not just to U.S. imperialism in Cuba, but and then in so many ways. I found it interesting that you described the mantle, which is really not, I guess I thought of it this way, but you articulate the mantle of what Eurocentrism as being, or the mission of Eurocentrism and really, I guess, white supremacy being dominated, being taken out of Europe, Eurocentrism out of Europe, and being placed with the United States, with the U.S. being the agents of the pushing Eurocentrism.
Yes, that is right. I think that with regards to Cuba-U.S. relations, with regards to how one views the political system of Cuba, it is important for people in the United States and Canada to try and shed as much as possible the views based on U.S. centrism, that is, with regards to the number of political parties, etc. This comes up quite a few times in the course of my book, how the United States under Obama and more recently under Trump, they always tried to pressure Cuba with regards to the so-called violation of human rights, that there's only one party, etc., etc. So in order to get a grasp of it, I don't believe in just saying, well, United States, what they say about Cuba is wrong, it's no good, etc. One has to go to the very roots of it. If not, it's very easy to fall into the trap as even some people in the left do, that, well, Cuba is, it's okay, it has health care and education and sports, etc. for the people, but, it's sort of authoritarian. It only has one party. Hopefully they will open up with more parties, and there's a lack of freedom of the press, etc. We see this, unfortunately, among some people on the left who fall into this trap, and I think the reason for them falling into this trap is the sort of is because of the essence of U.S. centrism, because of American chauvinism, remains as part of the outlook in the United States. Of course, there are many people on the left who are immune to it, such as yourself and your radio program. Also, there's BAR, Black Agenda Report, and Counterpunch, etc. But not everyone is immune to it. That's why it's important that I go into this whole thing of U.S.-centric outlook as the very basis of U.S. policy towards Cuba, irrespective of the administration, Obama or Trump.
Mm-hmm. And can you sort of tease out this? You're referring to it as a trap. The trap being, be more explicit to people who might not quite get what.
Well,
the one party.
Okay, the trap is as follows: is that someone can say, I don't agree with U.S. centrism. Cuba has its own path to follow, etc., etc. No one can dictate to Cuba with regards to the type of system it has, which is all very good. But at the same time, some of these analysis right after that will say, in analyzing Cuba, yes, of course, they've have some accomplishments, but of course it's authoritarian. There are no the full amount of political rights that should exist in Cuba for the Cubans are not really there. That there is a need for more open freedom of the press, political parties, competition, etc. Now, I'm not going to argue that there is no need for improvement in Cuba's political system. Of course there is, and the Cubans are the first one to recognize it and are striving to do so in the context of their upgrading their socialist system. But it's another thing to, through innuendo, say pretty much the same thing as the official U.S. discourse is, that Cuba is authoritarian. And I think the worst thing is that it comes from some people on the left or some analysts who consider themselves friends of Cuba, pro-Cuba, etc. So I think there is, as you say, it's really the, very at the very heart of the matter. And I think that U.S. centrism, I talk quite a bit in my book, as you may notice, with regards to the cultural war, the U.S.-led cultural war against Cuba. Mm-hmm. This, by culture, I mean three aspects. One is the artistic dimensions, such as singers and dancers, etc., as well as political and ideological. These are the three features of the cultural war against Cuba. Now, what came to mind, and I bring this out, and it's the only book that deals with cultural war. There are a lot of books and articles with regards to the U.S. blockade against Cuba. This is very good, but one has to also deal with the cultural war that is being waged by the United States against Cuba. I have to say, initiated by Obama with the December 17th, 2014 joint declaration with Raul Castro, and his visit to Havana in March 2016, and in a more crude fashion, of course, with Trump, but the same content. And the basic feature of that is, and one of the things that the Obama uses and people and since then is by sending these cultural ambassadors to Cuba, such as Rihanna. This is one of the examples I give. Right. Even though it goes against the grain, some people in Cuba might not like it because they do not see the importance of how the U.S. uses culture to try and infiltrate the minds, especially of the Cuban youth, to create illusions about the United States, to instill notions of individualism in Cuba, to go against the Cuban socialist culture. So I deal with these things that no one else deals with, I have to say. I even deal with the Rolling Stones. Like, what was the real nature of the Rolling Stone visit to Cuba and its aftermath? What happened? I deal with this in detail, and I'm sure it will be controversial among some people in North America and even in Cuba, but I think I'm the type of person, we've known each other for a long time. If I think something has to be said, I say it. I don't care if it's popular or not at the time when I write it.
And you know, I had to, because I don't, not to cut you off, because what you just said, I have a friend of mine that just came back, and that was his first time going. And one of the things, and he's a pretty revolutionary mind, and one of the things that he said what struck him was the young people who were saying, you know, the U.S. Is the greatest country in the world, right? And these are Cubans, young Cubans. And then he said, well, we don't have, and they would have like discussions to summarize. He said, we don't have freedom here. And then when he asked them more about this concept of freedom was really based on not really like the kind of propaganda we get here, because they don't go for, is based on not having money, not having and really wanting to start these, like these businesses and these, you know, like tour guides or be a musician, those kind of things. And that was very interesting to hear that. But they equate their economic restrictions, and they don't even, and he would say, well, what about the blockade? And be like, yeah, you know, that exists, but so it was very interesting.
No, I think that anecdote from one of your friends or colleagues who went to Cuba and came back to let people know, but I think that is very significant. You know, I do the same thing. When I go there, I notice things. For example, I noticed before December 17, 2014, when the relationships were established, that there were quite a few young people wearing the American flag as part of their clothing, okay? And then this even increased after December 17, 2014, and has not let up at all since the image of U.S. imperialism changed from the good guy, Obama, to the bad guy, Trump. This keeps going on as a trend within Havana, collaborated by some of my Cuban colleagues, which I quote in my book, who deal also in detail with the issue of Cuban flag as not a secondary thing when it's being worn as clothing by young Cuban people. So I think that this is, you know, an indication of illusions that exist amongst the some of the Cuban youth with regards to the United States. And I think this is very, very dangerous. And secondly, I am sure that Washington and its intelligence forces and those who work out democracy promotion programs, that they are fully aware of this weakness in Cuba and are trying to exacerbate the what they see as a conflict between some sections of the Cuban youth and the Cuban Revolution. A concept that your friend and you, by describing his experience there, very aptly give us an indication of what the problem is all about. This conception, you know, like you just started your program by a quote from Omaya, in which he's talking from the prison nation. I mean, here's an American, African with a prison nation, meaning the United States, while Cuban youth some of them see the United States as a promising alternative. This is a very serious situation.
Right. Yeah, Arnold, let's take a break. We got to go back of the social justice calendar. We're speaking with Arnold August and about his new book, Cuba-U.S. Relations, Obama and Beyond. We'll be right back.
This is Voices with Vision on your Jazz and Justice station, WPFW.
My name is Netfa Freeman. We're speaking with Arnold August about his new book, Cuba-U.S. Relations, Obama and Beyond. And Arnold, I wanted to get, since we run out of time, go into what Obama really said about Cuba, foreign affairs in the U.S. I mean, we're going to just tease that out so we can jump forward. And then, you know, talk about and I think you allude to in your book that the trajectory of U.S. foreign relations, U.S. policy with Cuba, Trump and the Obama administration, there's some unrecognized lines or ties in there that people don't see. If I'm wrong, correct me. Go ahead.
Between Obama and Trump?
Yeah, or the policy, the administration's policies, not these individuals.
I think that's an important point. Obama, with regards to that section, what Obama really said with regards to Cuba, I think that in his speech to, for example, to the Cuban nation in March 2016, he very deftly, and as he is able to do as a smiling Ivy League professor, said that Cuba should forget about the past. We should look forward to the future. This is not a minor statement, as Cuba cannot forget what the United States has done towards it, going all the way back from 1898 when it interfered in Cuba's liberation war against Spain to virtually annex Cuba in the 1900s. And so these are the things that he really said, which are not secondary at all. With regards to, on the one hand, he said that we have to respect, Cuba sovereignty. Cubans are the ones who should decide the future of Cuba. At the same time, while he was there in Havana, he met with dissidents in Havana on his own, whose main program is not to respect Cuba's sovereignty, but to try to, with the aid of the United States, foment regime change in Cuba. And there are many other examples such that, immediately after having returned from Havana to Washington, D.C., a new regime change program with more funds were established in order to target Cuba once again, to change the situation, what they call Change Cuba, which is very far, in my view, from saying that, well, Cuba is sovereign and we have to respect their rights. One has to put these statements by the United States in context. For example, Trump also said in his June 16th statement, in his own way, that, well, Cuba is a sovereign nation, we have to respect that. But you cannot get a more interference-like statement by an American president with regards to Cuba's internal situation. But they basically say the same thing. Oh, yes, we agree with Cuba as a nation, a sovereign nation, and has the right to decide its future. We have diplomatic relations with Cuba. But behind all that, you have, I would say, the increase in democracy promotion programs, the increase in trying to pressure Cuba to give up its past of socialism, independence, and dignity, and conciliate itself with the U.S. model. I think this is important, and this goes to your second question as well, with relating Obama to Trump. Look, I'm not going to say that Trump June 16th speech and spectacle in Miami did not go out of his way to be provocative against Cuba. At the same time, he maintained diplomatic relations with Cuba. He did not, despite the desire by the Miami American, Cuban Americans such as Rubio to eliminate the diplomatic relations, to close the American embassy in Havana. Trump did nothing nothing at all with regard to that, and so I characterize it that Trump has put forward a change of tactics, but within the tactics of the Obama administration, which essentially is the following, brother, if I might say so, that United States, as Obama said, we failed in our policy with regards to Cuba, with regards to the blockade. This was a failure. Therefore, we have to change our tactics. But change our tactics for what? To use other tactics through soft diplomacy, diplomatic relations, Rihanna, Rolling Stones, and others. To use that in order to achieve the basic goal of subverting the Cuban Revolution. Now, this is not basically different from the Trump policy, and I would have to say since December 17, 2014, the U.S. policy towards Cuba has become an official state or an official Washington policy, whether it's Obama before, Trump now, or the next president in a few years. This has become the main state policy. In the same way, if I may draw a comparison, but from another point of view, in Canada, here we have had diplomatic relations with Cuba right from 1959, even before that, before the revolution, to this day. And so irrespective of who is in power in Ottawa, whether it's the Conservatives or Liberals, this basic a policy of maintaining diplomatic relations, friendly relations with Cuba is a state policy. It's not a partisan policy, and this applies to the United States as well since December 17, 2014.
I'm loving this book, Cuba-U.S. Relations, Obama and Beyond. We just scratched the surface of it. I mean, I like what you talk about, the cultural wars, which you didn't get into, why it's so possible that the U.S. can leverage this type of influence in any other country but not be subject to it. And then, as you said, the so-called democracy programs, because they're so-called, and you demonstrate why they're not really democracy programs, but programs of imperialism and dominance. We're speaking with Arnold August. Get this book, Cuba-U.S. Relations, Obama and Beyond. And, of course, Arnold, I owe you, I don't owe you, but, we're going to organize for you to come to the United States and have a book event where you can do a book signing and longer talk. And so thank you so much.